Welcome to the virtual launch of the Independent Director in Society. Thank you for joining us from your home or workplace this morning. I'm Stephen Stern and I'm your host today. It's the first virtual book launch I've ever attended. Now, nothing could be more important than the quality of governance throughout society. The difference between good governance and bad affects all of us, all of the time. And this book reveals the governance crisis to be found in our charity, health, sports and university sectors. It shines a light on the issues and the challenges and provides route maps for change. Now, I've been writing about management and leadership for quite a while now. In my time, I've worked at the BBC, Management Today magazine and the Financial Times, as well as being a visiting professor in management practice at the Business School at City University, London. And for me, one of the best bits of the book is that it illustrates the need for independent voices in the boardroom. Board level discussions have got to be honest and people have got to be able to say what they really think if the board is going to do the job it's supposed to do. Now, for the next 40 minutes, we're going to give you a snapshot into this insightful book. I'll introduce you to the authors and those involved in the research. We have Gerry Brown, Felipe Moret, Andrew Kakabadze and Andrew Myers, who will talk about its relevance, the research and the impact of each sector on society. We'll also hear from some industry experts, Sir Steve Smith, former Vice-Chancellor and Chief Executive of Exeter University, and Dr. Roger Barker, course leader at the Institute of Directors. They will talk to us about the importance of independent directors and why this book is more relevant now than ever. We'll also hear from the publisher, Stephen Partridge of Palgrave Macmillan, about why they wanted to publish this book. At the end, we'll have an interactive Q&A session. So I hope you'll enjoy the show. And now I'll hand over to Gerry Brown. Gerry is a seasoned business leader and author of several books. Over to you, Gerry.
I would like to say to the viewers today, thank you very much indeed for giving up your time to join us for this virtual book launch, and also to thank all of those who participated in the research with Henley Business School, especially the key opinion leaders from the worlds of the NHS, universities, charities and sporting bodies. This book came to fruition because the challenges facing independent directors and boards have never been greater. And secondly, because the consequences of board ineffectiveness are absolutely dreadful for society. For example, in the world of business, bankruptcies or tax evasion or environmental damage or mishandling of data, sexual harassment, just to name a few.
I think this is a really important book for society because it's based upon actual empirical research. There's a lot of books about boards and governance and directors, but none, to my knowledge, have anything like the detailed analysis of over 600 directors and in-depth interviews with over 50 key directors and chief executives. So this is based on evidence and its conclusions come from an examination of 4 sectors, and that's very, very unique for the material that deals with this issue. But the key point here is this book's conclusions derive absolutely from the massive amount of empirical research that the authors have undertaken. And thus, the conclusions aren't just kind of theoretical, they're based upon in-depth study of 4 major areas with lots and lots of case studies and a wealth of empirical information.
So really, why should anyone want to buy this book? One, because they want to know more about the reality of governance. And the reality of governance is oversight. The purpose of a board is to oversee these assets and do the best they can in that stewardship of those assets. Governance is not compliance. Governance is not laws as it is in America. Thankfully, we've not quite reached that stage here in the UK. So if you want to get a balanced view, buy this book. If you want to get a database, the latest data on boards and how they operate comparing the third sector with the private sector, buy this book. If you want to get an understanding of what it means to be independent and create that independent mindset, again buy this book. And I believe that we still have more work to do on the notion of independence so that we can really help chairmen create an independent mindset on a board.
This book is unique for three reasons. The first is the specificity of the subject. You know, there are plenty of books around on governance and what happens when governance goes wrong. There's even at least one good book on independent directors. But I've not seen anything on the role and the importance of the role of independent directors in these four really important sectors: healthcare, education, universities, charities and sporting organisations. So that makes it unique. Secondly, you've got that blend of experience and academic rigour. You've got Gerry with his years of experience in business and as a very good independent director. He really knows what he's talking about. You've got the quality of the academic research that Andrew and Felipe bring. That blend is powerful. And then thirdly, this is a book that doesn't just say, there's a problem. Firstly, it proves there's a problem. It then provides really good practical advice on how to find those diverse, independent, strong directors who will help make organisations function more effectively. And it provides some useful policy advice. In short, it's a really, really good book.
The main key theme, which is relevant to all sectors, is the crisis in governance with the ineffectiveness of boards. The best examples are scandals in charities, for example, Oxfam, in universities with the overpayment of vice-chancellors, and in sport with the FIFA example. All of these clearly show how society is impacted. The key outputs from the book are firstly the need to really improve the diversity of boards. Secondly, to improve the quality of training for independent directors. Thirdly, to reduce the disparity of effectiveness between the different regulators across all sectors. And lastly, to improve board evaluation.
The one thing that surprised me most about the research was the fact that so many directors are lacking in development and in understanding what is the role of the independent director.
Well, I believe there are sort of three key outputs from my perspective in the book. To me, obviously, the role of the independent director is an important one. They're there to ensure good stewardship and hold the board into account. Secondly, the independent director can bring that added value to the board. They can articulate a different perspective or actually sort of introduce a knowledge or skill area that the board is currently lacking in. And the third point is the positive impact that the independent director can have is actually sort of in terms of the relationships they have with people at board level. But it's important they need to be well prepared and understand how well the organisation operates for them to be effective.
What I've learned from this book and this research: number one, the importance of stewardship. Number two, the importance of stewardship. And number three, the importance of stewardship.
I think what will surprise the reader more is the fact that the independent director can make such a difference for society by performing his or her role in a way that ensures that the NHS, charities, sports organizations and universities fulfill their purpose, and by making sure that they're there to serve the wider interests of society.
I think the shock to me of the book was that certainly in the university sector, in the sports sector and in the charity sector, you've got very different patterns of how governance operates. The NHS was the exception. It looks very tightly governed. And of course, I suspect that's because there are very, very easily quantifiable ways in which you can assess how a health service is doing. I thought actually the sector I know best did not come out well. And what I felt was it showed a difference there whereby the management were managing, but quite often the boards were not terribly closely involved. They dealt with strategy, but very low performance management focus in that area, and in sport and charities as well.
I think that this book really addresses some of the key current governance issues by looking at how governance operates in different types of organizations, but also by looking at how the role of the independent director is so crucial to delivering good governance. And, independent directors are there to achieve, pretty much what it says on the tin. They're there to provide an independent perspective, a perspective that is not seen as somehow biased or is just working in operation of one particular stakeholder or interest group, but which is actually taking the broader perspective and ensuring that the organization is fulfilling this wider society goal, which actually sees a range of stakeholders as being crucial to a company's success. And what this book, I think, does is it gets into the nitty-gritty of how someone can really make the most of that role as an independent director, an appreciation of actually the huge challenge which it involves, the range of legal liabilities and reputational liabilities that independent directors face, but also a lot of practical experience and good advice onto how, in a very practical sense, this key role of independent director can be made to work.
What key things did we know but now see differently? From my perspective, and that's simply because I'd done a lot of research, and the research, I should say, covers 43 countries. It covers thousands of organizations, it covers about 5,000 boards, and it covers 3 governments. So not that much, except for the fact that today the public sector and the third sector, charities and sports and so on, have basically exactly the same structures as the private sector. So there is hardly any difference. The only difference would be that there may be something peculiar about sport or something particular about universities. But in the structure of governance, in the way the institution is placed and directed and pushed forward, it's identical.
I think in order to have a positive benefit on society, boards need to ensure that they are definitely meeting the needs of its stakeholders, and that's all of its stakeholders. So directors need to effectively balance the duties of the compliance, stewardship and control, which they are responsible for, but they also at the same time need to be effectively engaged with others to install positive relationships at board level. I think when this is done well, then it is actually meeting the needs of society.
How will society benefit? In one sense, and in one sense only. The key message of this book is governance today is very important. I think too many people see governance as an infringement of their freedoms, particularly management teams. Others see governance as bureaucracy, too many disciplines, too many rules and procedures which will knock us off course, prevent sales from taking place. That's not true. Governance is there to both create a sales environment, a marketing environment, but also to protect.
A lot of the key challenges in society and that organizations operating in society face are due to the increasing level of complexity of the world in which they operate. I've worked in publishing for 30 years, and for 30 years manuscripts have been coming in saying, oh, we live in a time of unprecedented change. And people are saying that in 2020, I'm sure they were saying it in 1920, 1820, 420 BCE. But the world is getting more complex, and those changes mean that it's much harder for organizations and leadership in organizations to operate in that world. Now, in theory, that is the role of the executive team, but no executive team is strong enough to be able to be across all of the various issues facing society at the moment. And so that's why the role of the independent director is important. And I think it comes down to 2 key issues, independence and diversity, which are both very strong themes running through this book. You know, that independence of mind to challenge an organisation and the skills that they bring help organisations in good times, but they're even more important when an organisation is going through bad times. Good, strong, independent directors are our first line of defence when things start going wrong in organisations. But I think beyond that independence of mind and the strength of character that is a key theme through the book, the theme of diversity is really interesting to me. You know, I may be knowledgeable enough about the area, I may be independently minded enough, I may be strong enough to challenge you and pick you up on things that have gone wrong. But if, you know, we come from the same background, we went to the same sort of schools, we live in the same area, there's going to be a limit to how much use I can be to you and the sort of things I'm going to pick up. Now, you know, I think we can take two recent examples, Me Too and Black Lives Matter. They're things that not only shouldn't have happened, but wouldn't have happened if most of our organisations had this sort of diverse oversight in governance in place that would have been there to see these problems, understand those problems, highlight them, challenge them, and stop those things happening. Those are the sorts of challenges that this book addresses.
So I think sport, charities and universities could take away from the study quite a lot of lessons on best practice. In my own area, I think the one key thing that came through was that the university sector tends to be a sector in which governance is quite light, it's not very detailed, and closing that gap, especially given that we're going to be in a time where the sector is going to diverge, institutions will rise and fall, they'll change their missions, they'll do different things. I think there's a warning sign here that unless the governance practice improves in universities, you could see the danger whereby the governors are not able to exercise sufficient oversight over the actions of the management so that the management are held to account in a very quickly changing environment.
The example of the worst impact on society of board ineffectiveness is the National Health Service. 1 in 5 of the trustees surveyed said that it was impossible to do their job. The reason for that is to do with the mandate of the National Health Service being impossible to meet. This arises from all of the demands on the NHS, whether it's the ageing population or the demands of modern day living to do with obesity, for example, or dementia, or cancer, and all of those other demands. The number one change to improve board effectiveness that is recommended in the book is to pay independent directors. The challenges in independent directors' roles are so demanding, it's not possible just to rely on volunteers anymore. We have to attract a wider diversity of people from the community, and to do that, we must pay independent directors.
The top 3 things that I've learned, I think what is so fundamental about the research is that it really demystifies the issue of independence and shows that independence is not something that people possess. It's not a quality that you are born with. It's something that you have to be very conscious about, and you need to exercise it. So it's a behavior. The second thing that was interesting about the research is that the chair leadership, to make sure that that independence is brought to the fore and can really make the difference in the boardroom, is often overlooked. And the third thing is really about the importance of independence not being a detractor to knowledge.
Change looks like a new type of board of directors with a new type of person sitting on the board with new skills and a much more open and independent and questioning dynamic. And I think we have to get away from the board as a stodgy old consensus-oriented group. It's all about challenge, positive challenge and new ideas.
We're now going to open the Q&A. For those of you watching at home, feel free to ask a question via the chat function on the screen. Right, we've got a first question, which is, can you give me an example of the worst consequences of board or independent director ineffectiveness in its impact for society?
The best example of independent directors and their impact on society is the fact that, as we mention in the book, up and down the country, thousands of volunteers as independent directors are doing their very best in difficult circumstances to run the National Health Service, to run universities, to run charities and to run sporting bodies. From the results of their endeavours, of course, everybody in society benefits.
If an organisation's not able to develop its organisational progress, then it's not going to cope with those sort of future challenges. And this could have, sort of long-term impact on its reputation and could possibly damage it in the long term.
How will society benefit from an improved board?
Society benefits from an improved board by, for example, a reduction in the number of scandals and the human tragedies involved. Secondly, in the improvement in quality of service across all sectors. Thirdly, in the improvement in value for money. And lastly, in the longer and healthier lives that people will be able to lead.
Well, I believe that an effective board can only have a positive impact on society. And I think the reason behind that, it just generates the confidence within society that a board is making effective and responsible decisions that not just have the interests of the organisation at heart, but also have the ones of the society as a whole. And it's not just down to one individual.
Is there ignorance about the role of independent directors? And if so, what is it?
I think that there is ignorance about the role of independent directors because most people don't understand how that differs from any other kind of director. There's, I think, a need to actually educate people on the importance of directors achieving an independent and objective perspective. You're not there as a director to represent any particular group, but really to think holistically about what the best interests of the organisation are.
There is enormous ignorance about the role of the independent director in society, and this is one of the issues which we address in our book. For example, the independent directors are the long-term custodians for organisations. Secondly, their role with boards. And thirdly, the knowledge, skills and attributes necessary in order to be effective in the role.
Okay, if you're asking about is there ignorance in society, I'd say probably yes. People are certainly familiar with watchdogs such as Ofcom, Ofgen and so on, but they may not be clear about the role of the independent director and the role that they play in society. I think this book provides a useful insight into that. If you're asking about is there ignorance among independent directors, in some cases this could be true. Ones who are not prepared to get to know the organisation or who are not putting in the hours to actually understand the organisation and make sure things are done properly are probably adding sort of little value. So the role of independent director needs to be, in my opinion, sort of clearly defined as to what is expected of them, as well as providing them at different stages the training and development where it's required to help them improve and have a positive impact at board level.
How has COVID exacerbated some of the issues we were already facing? And which sector has specifically suffered as a result?
COVID has exacerbated all of the challenges affecting the sectors. First of all, companies are fighting hard just to survive. Next, we have the crisis in public health in the National Health Service. Next, we have the challenges facing universities. Then we have the nightmare scenario for charities trying to raise money. And lastly, we have sport, where much of sport has just stopped. Universities have suffered from COVID-19 in the following way. Firstly, there is a predicted financial black hole of £19 billion. Next is the uncertainty regarding international student take-up of places. Thirdly, there is the issue of uncertainty for students regarding the implications of the move to online teaching. And lastly, the impact on staff of coping with all of these changes.
We've got one very clear example of how COVID has affected the governance process. So, like most universities, especially the research universities, we have an enormous amount of capital investment, about 480 million in the pipeline at the moment. 88 million was about to be signed off in July this year. We couldn't do it. We couldn't do it, not because we didn't need it. In fact, if we don't do it, we damage ourselves. But our governors were holding weekly meetings with us saying, hang on, where's the income coming from? What if there's no international students? So we've had to make a very tough series of contingent decisions on how or whether to invest in the research and teaching capital spend of the institution.
The economy has suffered enormously as a consequence of COVID-19, with predicted unemployment of 3 million and the government borrowing predicted this year to be £320 billion.
I think the COVID-19 crisis can make the NHS more risk averse. It was already quite substantially a risk averse organization. And at the same time, everything, the 5 years forward view, the 10 years forward view for the NHS are asking the NHS to transform fundamentally, to become more digital, to become more locally, to have different care models that deliver care in the communities, and become less hospital-based. I think there's a fundamental tension between the assumptions of the long-term view for the NHS and what the COVID-19 crisis came to show, that actually, diseases that are transmissible are not under control.
The charity sector has been negatively impacted by COVID-19 in the following way. 85% of the sector is made up of small charities with turnover of less than £500,000. The current predictions are that 15% of all of charities will be bankrupt.
How has this book highlighted the importance of identifying risks and a strategy to face these risks?
This book has highlighted the importance of identifying risk by showing that, for example, 90% of companies did not even have the global pandemic COVID-19 on their risk register. And secondly, in none of the sectors surveyed was their attention really paid to the risks associated with COVID-19.
I think this book has been successful in identifying the risks and strategies that independent directors need to think about, because it very much highlights their role relative to the sort of directorship that we've seen in the past, which has been about simply speaking out on behalf of one particular group, or taking a very narrow perspective on what the company's purpose is. And if nothing else, this has demonstrated that as a director, you need to think about the interests of everyone in the organisation and how it has a sustainable future.
I think most effectively managing risks could have serious consequences, and the cases highlighted in the book for each of the sectors, as well as high-profile ones such as scandals in Oxfam and corruption in FIFA, show the importance of having a clear strategy that can mitigate these risks. However, it needs to be a strategy, in my opinion, that is both open and transparent, so that the board can be held into account, and so that they are open to external scrutiny when required.
Which sector concerns you most, and what are the future challenges it faces, and how might they be addressed?
In the future, the main challenge that's coming to the sector, there's going to be a number. Do we deliver teaching online or in person? What happens if there's a COVID outbreak on campus in the next year? how many international students will come to the UK, what's the future of the workplace, you know, how do we organise our teaching and our administration. But the number one challenge, which is going to be a massive challenge for governors, is I think the sector is going to diverge. There will be institutions that do very well in this new environment, the research strong institutions in particular, and there'll be institutions that are less popular. Now, the key point is you can manage through those, but the real problem is if your governors and your executives think you're in different parts of the market. That's a real challenge. So in the next 3 or 4 years, there are going to be fundamental challenges to governance. And what this book is so good at is showing us in advance what those challenges are going to be and suggesting ways in which those challenges can be overcome.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but any unanswered questions will be posted on the website after the event with responses. And that brings us to the end of the Independent Director in Society book launch. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for attending. If you'd like to purchase the book, it can be bought through the publisher, Palgrave, or through Amazon. Keep an eye out for activity on the website. We look forward to seeing you again in real life soon. Goodbye from all of us.